Tonight I will be giving a speech on racism. But before I get started, let me first introduce my audience. This is my audience. And now I'd like to tell you a short story. I have a good friend who's African American, and the other day he told me how he got bullied every single day in high school simply because the color of his skin was different from those in his class. This story and many others like that are good examples of what racism has become in America today. So, how do we stop racism? People of all different skin colors and ethnicity experience racial abuse every day in America. Although there are laws that work to prevent racial abuse, many Americans still show racism through verbal, emotional, physical, and/or many other forms of racial ill treatment. Therefore, as Christians, we must work to reduce racism in America and show the love of God to everyone. Southern states of America are often considered to have the highest rates of racism in the United States. I have lived in the South for my entire life and have witnessed racism being portrayed through people's words and actions many times. As a Christian, I see the harm that racism can cause and desire to find ways to end it. In the following minutes, I will discuss the definition of racism and how it affects people, along with reasons that God hates the sin of racism, and finally present ways to decrease racism in American culture. Let's take a closer look at the definition of racism. Racism has a broad definition due to the fact that it affects so many different people groups. Racism is explained at www.eeoc.gov when the website states that racism and racial discrimination involves treating someone unfavorably because he or she is of a certain race or because of personal characteristics associated with that race. Kenneth Pons adds to the definition of racism in his article entitled "The Trauma of Racism, America's Original Sin," when he states that once called America's original sin, racism is exhibited in the physical, mental, economic, and spiritual violence done to people of color. He also believes that regardless of conscious intent, everybody in our society is conditioned, affected, and infected by racism. After understanding what racism is and how it can affect people, a person must ask why racism is biblically wrong, which leads me to my next point. Racism is not only a social issue, it is a spiritual one. It goes against God's word, and God despises the sin of racism. Genesis 1:27 exemplifies the fact that God created everyone equal when it states, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." James 2:9 is a strong example of how God detests racism because it states, "But if you show partiality, you are committing sin, and you are convicted by the law as transgression." As you can see, God equally desires for everyone to be treated as his special creation. Therefore, God hates the sin of racism and desires for us to go against racism as Christians. This leads me to my last topic. What is the best way for Christians to help end racism in the hearts and minds of people in America? Gary Williams believes in his article "Embracing Racism, Understanding Its Pervasiveness and Persistence" that racism in America is here to stay. It will not be abolished or reformed. While racism may not be completely abolished ever, it can be significantly decreased. However, how do we do that? Mary Stewart and Rosemary Dixon state in Speaking Race/Hearing Racism that anti-racist movements are uncertain of direction. Anti-racist movements have made strong decreases in racism over the years in America. However, for them to be completely effective, they must tell people about God and how he loves every single one of them. As I have previously stated, racism has a broad definition because it affects so many people, along with racism being a sin in God's eyes, and how we as Christians should take the steps necessary for ending racism. Racism is a form of hatred and cruelty that plagues America today. And not only does it infect those who are racist and those who experience racial discrimination, it also goes against God's specific laws. Therefore, as Christians, we must be willing to show the love of Christ to every person because God created us all equally when He created one human race. As you can see, racism is a major problem in America today, and consequently, we as believers must stand up and fight against it. Thank you.